Welcome back to this very special Indianomics. I've been speaking with Dr. Nouriel Roubini, and we will be speaking right now about his latest book, Mega Threats, which has got rave reviews from a whole host of economists. Dr. Roubini, thank you very much for waiting on. Well, one point that you point out both in the Project Syndicate article and in the book Mega Threats is the likelihood of protracted inflation, given the fact that there is friendshoring and nearshoring, as you point out, higher protectionism, as well as this chase for greenflation, as you call it. Can you tell us, I mean, is this what we are, is the period of deflation over? Is it behind us? And are we clearly leading into a medium-term inflation?
Yes, we are, both for supply-side reasons and demand-side reasons. On the supply side, there are a number of medium, long-term stagflationary shocks and trends that reduce potential growth and increase the cost of production. They are restrictions to trade, protectionism and deglobalization, reshoring and friendshoring, aging of population in many countries, restriction to migration, geopolitical depression and decoupling, global climate change, pandemics, backlash against income and wealth inequality, cyber warfare, and weaponizing the dollar. On the demand side, we live in a world where there is so much private and public debt that the central banks try to raise interest rates to fight inflation that cause an economic and financial crash. There'll be structural budget deficits. We have to spend more on security, to fight climate change, to fight the next pandemic, to fight robotic automation and the implication for jobs, and to reduce inequality. All those things imply more government spending. There are constraints on how much we raise taxes. We'll have structural larger budget deficits that either crowd out growth or they cause a debt crisis, or if we monetize them, we can wipe out some real value of these debt and deficits through inflation. So I fear that the path of least resistance is going to be to monetize and higher average inflation. Not very high in advanced economies, but not 2%, maybe 6% or so in advanced economies.
Oh, that changes the grammar of international finance altogether if we have to have, a 6% Western nation inflation. I'll come to that in a minute. But coming back to mega threats, one of the big things you point out is the likelihood of war because of this alternate set of countries, Iran, North Korea, Russia and China, challenging the system put in by the Western nations. We have come to the brink of war even during the Cold War. I mean, the Cuban Missile Crisis and other such flashpoints. But we moved back. Do you not think that we will move away from the brink even in the times to come?
Well, certainly we'll have cold wars that are getting colder. Whether those cold wars lead to outright hot war is to be seen, hopefully not. But even a situation of cold war is going to imply decoupling, fragmentation, balkanization, and stagflationary shock. But look, we already have a hot war because of the brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine. This year, this war could become unconventional, could involve NATO. I was recently in Israel, but it's clear that Iran is becoming a threshold nuclear state. Israel will have to think of whether to bomb Iran or not. Either way, there'll be cost. And the Cold War between US and China is becoming colder by the day. There could be a looming conflict on the issue of Taiwan. But China has also territorial disputes with half a dozen countries in Asia. There are thousands of miles of the border between China and India that are disputed. Yes. Disputes with Japan, with Vietnam, with Indonesia, with the Philippines. And those tensions at some point could reach the boil. Now that China has stopped to hide their strength and bide their time, they're projecting power all over Asia.
Oh, yes, that is several flashpoints, and several of them on our border as well. Dr. Rubini, to come back to the inflation point that you're making, it's extremely convincing that we are not returning to the period of deflation. There is a medium-term inflation threat in front of us. If that is the case, then what are the changes that you see? Do you see changes to currency? Do you see a reduction of global growth itself, reduction of global trade itself because of this inflation threat?
Yes, the combination of inflation and negative supply shock implies a world where there is lower growth and higher inflation. That is bad, of course, for US and global equities, but is even worse for bonds. Last year, when US Treasury yields for 10 years went from 1% to 3.5%, you got 20% losses on bond prices, worse than the S&P that fell 15%. Suppose that the new normal is 6% inflation, then 10-year Treasury yields, they'll have to go eventually to 8%, 6% for inflation and 2% real. Now they're at 3.5%.
Yes.
They go from 3.5% to 8%. You have another 50% losses on what is supposed to be a safe, secure, and defensive assets, trillions of dollars of dollar treasuries or EM debt linked to the dollar or of high yield and high grade bonds. So the risk of significant losses both in bond markets and even in credit markets are significant.
Okay. Well, there should be a rush to buying commodity and commodity stocks in gold, as you point out. That seems to be the only safe harbor at this point in time. Well, Dr. Rubini, you know, of all the threats that you mentioned, which do you think is more imminent, can happen? And a related question, can science cure the problems that science has led us to? Like, you know, after all, vaccines cured the pandemic. So do you think science and sensibility can still prevail?
Well, in the short run, we have to worry about inflation,
Okay.
about recession and stagflation, about high debts and high interest rates causing a debt crisis, what I call the risk of a great stagflationary debt and financial instability. But some of the medium-term threats are becoming more proximate. The risk of war and the geopolitical depression is becoming front-loaded. The cost of global climate change, the risks that come from another global pandemics as severe, if not more severe, than COVID-19. And of course, with generative AI, the risk of displacement of many jobs, blue collar, high collar, white collar, but even creative becoming a looming thing. Yeah, technology can help us. If we have major technological revolution, AI, robotic, automation, machine learning, maybe we find a solution to climate change. Maybe we can increase the economic pie and make that more sustainable. Maybe we can find faster a cure for not only COVID, but other diseases. We may even reduce some of the geopolitical tension if there is greater economic growth. But on the other side, AI, machine learning, robotic automation leads to permanent technological unemployment,
Yes.
increases wealth inequality. It might even lead us to build bigger weapons to fight a bigger cyber wars. So we have to make sure that technology is used to increase the economic pie, to redistribute it to everybody, and to create peace, progress, and prosperity, as opposed to more inequality and more violent conflicts among rival powers.
Well, ultimately, good sense has to prevail, isn't it? Whether it is science or whether it is politics. Point taken, Dr. Rubini. This conversation will, I'm sure, goad more readers, more viewers to read your book and ensure that those dangers don't pan out the way you have described them. Thank you very much, Dr. Rubini, for joining us in this conversation.
Such a pleasure being with you today. Thank you.